Today, let's talk about the First Anglo-Maratha War. Now, this wasn't just another conflict over a piece of land. No, this was a spectacular clash of military philosophies, a grand chess match between two very different, very powerful opponents.
And really, this whole thing boils down to one fascinating question. How on earth does a fast-moving, hit-and-run guerrilla army stand a chance against a disciplined, modern military with all its firepower? The answer to that question would literally shape the future of the Indian subcontinent.
All right, so how does a war like this even get started? Well, you might be surprised. It wasn't some grand invasion. It all kicked off because of a family feud, a messy fight for the throne right at the heart of the Maratha Empire.
I mean, just look at this timeline. Things fell apart so fast. In just a couple of years, you go from stability to total chaos. And when the Maratha chiefs back the infant son as the true heir, the uncle, who was kicked out, Raghunath Rao, makes a fateful choice. He goes to the British East India Company and says, "Help me get my throne back, and I'll give you land." And that was the spark that lit the fuse.
So let's look at our two contenders. In one corner, you have the British East India Company. Think of them as a heavyweight boxer, slow, powerful, with disciplined infantry and devastating artillery. In the other corner, you have the Maratha Empire, more like a lightning-fast martial artist, with highly mobile cavalry that knows the terrain like the back of its hand. Two completely different styles, two completely different goals.
So, the British march in, thinking this is going to be a walk in the park. Their modern army against what they saw as a less organized force. Well, they were in for a rude awakening. The first major fight of the war was a total shock to the system.
To understand how the Marathas fought, you have to understand this concept, Ganimi Kava. It's basically a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. The idea is, why would you ever fight a big, powerful enemy on their terms? You don't. You fight like a swarm of hornets. You hit their supply lines, you stage ambushes, you attack where they're weakest, and then you just disappear into the landscape before they can even aim their big cannons.
And the Battle of Adas was Ganimi Kava put into practice. You have this British force marching confidently in their neat little lines, and the Marathas just ran circles around them. It was the first hard proof that this strategy wasn't just a theory. It worked, and it worked incredibly well.
Okay, so the British got a bloody nose at Adas, but they're not going to just pack up and go home. They double down. They send an even bigger army from Bombay. But here's the thing. The Marathas were expecting it, and they weren't planning a battle. Oh no. They were planning something much, much smarter. They were planning a trap.
This was just a brilliant execution. So first, you let the British army march deep into your territory. The farther they go, the longer their supply line gets, stretched thin like a rubber band. That's when your cavalry starts hitting it, day and night. Then you use scorched earth tactics. Burn the villages, destroy the food supplies in their path. The British army is marching on an empty stomach, getting weaker and weaker with every step, until finally, at the village of Wadgan, when they are at their absolute weakest, bam! The trap snaps shut.
And here's the craziest part. The British were defeated without even fighting a single major pitched battle. They were just bled dry, starved out, harassed, and completely demoralized until they had no choice left but to surrender. The Treaty of Wadgan that they were forced to sign was an absolute humiliation for the East India Company.
Now, a crushing defeat like that could have ended the entire war, but it didn't, because way over in Bengal, a very different kind of British leader looked at this disaster and decided, okay, if we can't win their game, we're going to make them play ours.
That leader was Governor General Warren Hastings, and he just flat out refused to accept the treaty. He called it illegal, said the officials who signed it had no authority, and basically just tore it up. Hastings knew that trying to chase the Maratha cavalry all over the countryside was a fool's errand, so he changed the question. He asked, "What are we good at?"
And the answer was forts, siege warfare. The British had the best artillery and the best engineers in the world. So the new strategy was simple. Stop chasing the army and start taking the fortresses. And you know what? It started working almost immediately. Major strongholds began to fall, even the legendary Gwalior fort, which many people thought was completely unconquerable.
So now we've got this incredible strategic deadlock. The Marathas, with their fast cavalry, pretty much own the entire countryside. But the British, with their big guns, can walk up to almost any fort and eventually take it. So who's winning? Well, the answer is nobody. They've fought each other to a grinding halt.
The war just devolved into this exhausting, endless cycle. The British would capture a fort, great. But the second their main army moved on, the Marathas would swarm back in, cut off the supplies to the British garrison, and take back control of everything around the fort. You just can't win a war that way. And after 7 long years of this, both sides were just burnt out.
So finally, they sit down and hammer out a peace deal, the Treaty of Salbai. And after all that fighting, all that money, all that bloodshed, what was the result? They basically just hit the reset button. The British dropped their candidate for the throne, they recognized the rightful Peshwa, and most of the territory went right back to how it was before the war started. It's wild.
But just because the map looked the same doesn't mean nothing changed. Oh no. This war was a brutal, 7-year-long education for both sides. It exposed every single strength and every fatal weakness they had.
So, what were the big takeaways? For the British, it was crystal clear. Our infantry and cannons are amazing for taking forts, but we are totally vulnerable to fast-moving cavalry. For the Marathas, the lesson was, our Ganimi Kava is brilliant for winning campaigns in the field, but it can't win the war if we can't actually capture and hold the enemy's fortified positions. Each side knew exactly what they needed to fix for next time.
But maybe the single most important consequence of this war had nothing to do with tactics at all. It was geopolitical. By making peace with the Marathas, the British managed to secure their flank. This freed them up to turn their full, undivided military attention towards their other great rival in India, the Kingdom of Mysore. The treaty essentially allowed them to fight their enemies one at a time.
So the war ends in a draw, a return to the status quo, on paper. But it was a costly lesson, forcing both empires to completely rethink how they waged war. And that leaves us with the final, crucial question. Who actually learned more from the stalemate? And who would be better prepared for round 2, which, by the way, was just around the corner?